Hey everybody, Jeff Schneider here, and in today's video we're going to learn how to memorize and internalize jazz licks so that you can work them into your improvised solos. We're going to be working with 6 licks from one of my favorite solos of all time. This is Michael Brecker's solo on Confirmation, and it's one of the first solos I ever transcribed all the way through. I remember being a sophomore in high school and staying up all night for several nights in a row, just working through this solo one lick at a time. So we're going to go through the same process with each lick, and they're going to get more and more complex as we go. So let's start with lick number 1. This is what it sounds like. Short and sweet, nothing too crazy, but again, this is going to be a good way of digging into this process. By the way, if you want to download the sheet music, you can get it for free at the link in the description below. I have it transposed for all the different instruments. The first step is to do a harmonic analysis. What key are we in? F major. Let's write in the Roman numerals. This is a basic 2-5-1 chord progression. So 2-5-1. That's the first step. All right, the next step is to analyze the scale degrees, but we're going to do it in 2 different ways. We're going to do it in a micro way and a macro way. Here's what I mean. Let's start with the micro, which is analyzing the scale degrees according to the chord symbol. So we have a G minor 7 here and a G. So G is the 1 of G minor 7. A is the 2, B flat is the 3, C is the 4. Now we have a C7, A is the 6 of C7, then we have another 6. And then this F right here is really related to the F because it's anticipating that chord. So we're going to put 1 for the F. All right, now that's the micro approach. The macro approach is where we analyze the notes against the key center, in this case F. So what's G in the key of F? It's 2. What's A? 3. What's B flat? 4. C is 5, A is 3, and another 3, and then the 1. Now that we have this micro and macro analysis, we can start to look for familiar shapes and patterns. And the reason we do both the micro and the macro analysis is because these different approaches are going to yield different shapes and patterns that look familiar and will be easy to memorize. You see, in order to memorize the licks, we have to look for things that we already know. It's always easier to learn something new when you can associate it to something you already know. So we're going to start with a clean slate here and look for some familiar shapes. Right in here, I think a good way of analyzing this is just by thinking of it as a G minor scale, because we're just going up the G minor scale. 1, 2, 3, 4. Easy enough. Now, this part right here, I'm not even going to think of this A as the 6 or the 13 of C. I'm just going to think of it as the 3 of F. So we have 3, 3, 1 in the key of F. Maybe I'll even do this in a different color to make it really clear. Okay, so 3, 3, and 1. So all of these notes here are like letters, and when you put them together, you get a word. And in this case, we have another word. Nice. All right. Let's now transpose these chunks just so we can ensure that we really know them. This is that internalization process. So let's just take the first word. That's easy enough. Let's do it in a few different keys. Here it is in D minor. Really easy, just going up. 1, 2, 3, 4. Here it is in C minor. Here it is in E flat minor. By the way, the reason I'm able to do this quickly is because I know my scales really well. And this exercise in and of itself will help you learn your scales, because whenever you're transposing anything into other keys, it forces you to learn that scale and to get to know it better and better and better. All right, let's go to the next word in this lick. It's the part right in here. And this is, again, just going to be 3, 3, 1. So let's try this lick in another key. Let's do it in G major. So actually, I'm going to use my chord scale charts here. Let's do G major. Okay, here we go. All right, so remember the chord progression is 5 going to 1. So the 5 chord is here, and the 1 chord is here. So it's a D7 going to G major. And remember, the lick is 3, 3, 1 in the key center. So what's 3, 3, 1 in the key of G? It's B, B, G. That's it. Let's do it in one more key. Let's do it in A major. Remember, the chord progression is 5 going to 1, and it's 3, 3, 1. That's the lick. By the way, you can download these chord scale charts for free in the description below. So let's put these two parts together, playing the whole lick in a new key. Let's do it in the key of B flat major. we're going to do a 2-5-1 in B flat major. That's C minor 7, F7, B flat major 7. And remember, we're going up the 2 chord up the scale like so. C, D, E flat, F, up the 2 chord. And then, remember, the second part is 3-3-1 in the key center. Sounds like this. Beautiful. I highly recommend you take every lick and transpose it through all the keys, because that's how you're really going to get to know it and be able to play it whenever and wherever you want. It does take time, but it gets easier and easier as you get to know your scales better and better. So let's go on to lick number 2. It's right here, and it sounds like this. Another 2-5-1 lick. Listen one more time. Okay, so same steps as before. What key are we in? F major. Let's do a quick harmonic analysis. It's the same thing. It's a 2-5-1, and now we're going to do that micro and macro analysis. So now that we have the micro and the macro analysis, we can look for those familiar shapes and patterns. So let's take a look here. We're going to do this phrase right here. We're going to break that down as one chunk, and then I'm going to do this for the other. So the first chunk in yellow there, we've got, yes, this A right here is technically, I'm talking about this one right here. This A right here, that's technically on the C7 chord, but I'm going to loop it into the G minor just because I think it's going to be easier for me to remember. So the first 4 notes, that's the giant steps lick. That's what I call it, at least. And if you watched my 10 licks every jazz musician should know, then you know what I'm talking about. And then we go to the 9 of the 2 chord. Let's do it in a couple other keys. How about D minor? Remember, we're starting on the 3rd. And there's the 9 at the top. If it's easier, you can break this down into 2 parts. Part 1, and then our 9 at the top. Let's do it in F minor. 3, 4, 5, 7, 9. Going on to the next part, we have the 5, the 6, and the 1. I'm relating that all to the 1 chord, F major. Nothing too crazy there. Let's do that in the key of A flat major. 5, 6, 1. Let's do it in the key of D major. If we want to throw in the 5 chord, in D major we could do A7, going to D major. All right, let's put it together in the key of D major while we're at it. Here's our D major sheet. We've got the 2 chord here, the 5 chord here, and the 1 chord here. So we're going to go up the 2 chord, starting on the 3rd, then the 9. That's our target right there. And then, thinking in terms of the 1 chord, 5, 6, 1. Sounds like this. All right, here's lick number 3. Again, a little slower. Now this one's a little bit different because we're not going to a major key anymore. We're going to a minor key or a minor chord. We've got a D minor, so that's going to be our 1. This is our 2. A7 is our 5. So it's another 2-5-1 lick, but now we're going to a minor chord. Now again, you can think about chords in a micro or a macro way as well. Yes, this is sort of the micro analysis in here, but remember, D minor is the 6th chord in the key of F. So that's the macro harmonic analysis. So let's look for some patterns and some shapes that are familiar. Right in here, we've got an arpeggio. That's like a diminished 7 arpeggio. But you can also think of it as 3, 5, 7, and then the flat 9 on that A7 chord. In fact, I'm not even going to be thinking about this 2 chord at all because the majority of the notes here, if not all the notes, lie really well just in the context of A7. So we've got 3, 5, 7, and then the flat 9. And then this shape right at the beginning is just going down the scale from the 5 to the 3. Just going down the scale, thinking about it in terms of A7. So that's part 1. Part 2 is going up the arpeggio, 3, 5, 7, flat 9. And then from there, we've got the remaining 3 notes. I really want you guys to pay attention to the fact that we are landing on the 3 of D minor. It's important to know where you're going. What's our target? In this case, it's the 3 of D minor 7. Now, there are a couple of ways of looking at these 3 notes. You can analyze it all in terms of the D minor, or you can do it in terms of A7 plus some D minor. I think I'm just going to think of it in terms of going down the scale in the context of A7. So starting on that B flat and then landing on the F. A quick side note, this lick right here is actually all derived from the D harmonic minor scale. Let's pull that up real quick. So check this out. We start off with E, D, C sharp. That's the first part. Then we go up our arpeggio, C sharp, E, G, B flat, and then we go down the remaining part of the scale. B flat, A, G, F. This is all coming from D harmonic minor. The scale is actually Mixolydian flat 2, flat 6. It's the 5th mode of the D harmonic minor scale. This baby right here. Mixolydian flat 2, flat 6. All right, back to it. So we have the flat 9 there, there's the 1, there's the 7, and then the 3rd of D minor followed by the 1 of D minor. With the chords. Let's transpose to another key because that's, again, going to really help us internalize this lick. So let's do it in G minor. The chords are going to be A half diminished, D7, G minor, 2, 5, 1. But for the most part, we're going to think of this in terms of the 5 chord, which is a D. So we're going to start by going down from the 5 of D, then arpeggiating up to the flat 9, and then down the scale until we hit the 3rd of the 1 chord, which is G minor, and then to our 1. Altogether, it sounds like this. All right, let's go on to lick number 4. We're going to rinse and repeat. The more times you see me do it, the better you're going to be at doing this on your own. So let's take a listen. First and foremost, what does this sound like? Again. Another 2-5-1 lick in the key of D minor, or going to a D minor chord. I'll play it a little bit slower. A quick analysis, we're going to D minor just as before. This is the same exact progression that we just did. Let's do some analysis at the note level. Again, we're going to be heavily relying on that D harmonic minor scale. And if you look at this part right here, this whole run is just going down the D harmonic minor scale. So I'm going to think of this as an A7 going to D minor. This whole lick is going to just be A7 in my mind, and then we're going to resolve to the D minor. So we know what's happening here. What is going on there with that D sharp? This note right here. It's really just a note that's approaching the E. This is sometimes called an enclosure because you're enclosing this E with the F and the D sharp. The F is a half step above the E, the D sharp is a half step below the E, and then we land on our target. We're going to be talking about enclosures and approach notes more and more as we go through the other licks. So we're approaching the 5 with a half step above, a half step below, and then going down the D harmonic minor scale. Or if you want to call it the A Mixolydian flat 2, flat 6. And I would practice it one part at a time and then put them together just like a puzzle. The next part is really easy. It's just one note. We're starting a half step below where we started the second word. What I would do is practice the second word and the third word first, and then add this beginning note at the very end of this lick learning process. And this will make more sense as we go to transpose it into a new key. Let's do that right now. Let's try it going to a C minor chord. So we have a 2 chord, 5, 1, D minor 7 flat 5, G 7, C minor 7. We're going to work backwards. The first word that we learned, in this case, this part right in here, remember, we're going to start on the 5 of the 5 chord. Since we're in the key of C, the 5 chord is G. What's the 5 of G? It's a D. 5, 4, 3, flat 9, 1, 7, and then we're on E flat, which is the third of C minor. So maybe I should have mentioned this before, but this B flat right here is the flat 9. One more time, starting on the 5 of the 5 chord. Now, how do we set up that part? Well, remember, we're going to do a half step above, a half step below, and then land on our target. Our target is the D. What's a half step above the D? E flat, a half step below, D flat, and then we land on the target. With the chords. Half step above, half step below, target. Our last part is just to start a half step below where we just started. So if our second word is, we're just going to lead into that with a chromatic approach, a half step below. We're landing on this E flat right here. So we want to go a half step below the E flat and then continue on down the scale. Here's what it sounds like with the chords. Guys, I can't stress enough that if you're having trouble, you need to practice the individual parts and then put them together. So just work on that in different keys. Let's do F minor. Okay, what's the 5 chord in the key of F? C7. What's the 5 of C7? G. Enclose the G. That's just one word. Practice each word individually, then put them together. And the best part is, when you start looking at the licks as individual parts, you're going to see those smaller pieces show up in all different licks, especially if it's by the same soloist, because usually a soloist has a vocabulary that they use again and again. And so the more you're aware of the individual cells and parts and pieces, whatever word you want to use, you're going to pick them up. And that's how you gain that familiarity, and those shapes and those patterns will jump out at you much more quickly. So we have 2 more licks left. Here's lick number 5. Again. I'll play it a little bit slower. Same chord progression as before. Let's do the analysis. Well, right off the bat, I'm seeing an A major triad. So Michael Brecker tends to just ignore the 2 chord a whole bunch on these 2-5-1 progressions. So we've got an A major triad. That's a triad going down 5-3-1 on the A7 chord. So that's 5-3-1, thinking in terms of A7. And then we're going up this pattern right here. This is from the altered dominant scale. The first 4 notes of the altered dominant scale, where you have the 1, the flat 9, the sharp 9, and the 3. Now, to some of you that might look like 4 random notes, but once you know that altered dominant scale and how it starts with the 1, the flat 9, the sharp 9, and the 3, you're going to recognize that because it comes up a ton in jazz solos, especially in this confirmation solo by Michael Brecker. Another way you can look at it is a half step, a whole step, and then another half step. Half step, whole step, half step. All right, so part number 1 is going down that triad, 5-3-1, and then going up that altered dominant scale. And then we have this part right here, C sharp, F, G, C. This is another really common arpeggio in the context of A7 altered. We have the 3, F is the sharp 5 or the flat 13. Let's just call it the sharp 5 for now. G is the 7, and C is the sharp 9 again. Again, this may be an unfamiliar pattern to some of you, but as you study more solos and jazz vocabulary, you're going to see this come up again and again. It also is common to play this going down. And this is all on an A7 chord. All right, let's put these parts together. So we're going to go down the triad, 5, 3, 1, up the altered scale, and then up the altered scale or the altered dominant arpeggio, 3, sharp 5, 7, sharp 9. And then we're going to finish off pretty simple here. We've got a D minor 7, A is the 5, and then we're just going to go down the scale until we hit the 3. Part 1, Part 2, Part 3, Part 4. I'm going to put Part 1 and 2 together now. Again. How about Part 2 going to Part 3, the altered dominant section? Again. And how about Part 3 going to Part 4? Let's try Part 2 going all the way to Part 4. And then putting it all together. By the way, in case you're curious, the altered dominant scale is 1, flat 9, sharp 9, 3, sharp 11, sharp 5, flat 7, and then you're back to the 1. So in the key of, in A7, we have A, B flat, C, or B sharp, C sharp, D sharp, E or F, or E sharp or F natural, and then G and back to A. It sounds like this. Let's now transpose to another key. Let's do it in the key of, let's do A minor. So the chord progression is going to be 2, 5, 1 in A minor, B half diminished, E7, A minor, or A minor 7, 2, 5, 1. But for the most part, we're thinking of this as a 5 chord going to a 1 chord. So E7 going to A minor. How do we start? We have that 5, 3, 1 arpeggio on the 5 chord, which is E7. That's part 1. And then we're going to go up the altered scale. 1, flat 9, sharp 9, 3. And now up the altered dominant arpeggio. 3, sharp 5, 7, sharp 9. Put that together. Finishing off with the very simple 5, 4, 3 on the 1 chord on A minor. Altogether, it sounds like this. All right, last one, lick number 6. This is the longest of the bunch. Let's play it first, and then we'll break it down. Again. Okay, a little bit slower. Again. So a lot of notes, but when you break it down into parts, it becomes much easier to memorize and absorb. First of all, what's going on harmonically here? We've got a 2, 5, 1 going to B flat. So C minor is the 2 chord, F7 is the 5 chord, and then B flat is the 1 chord. Let's look for some shapes. Right off the bat, I'm going to highlight this right in here. This is another one that I called out in my lick video from a while back. I call this one the freshman. And what we have here is an arpeggio going 3, 5, and 7 in the context of C minor 7. And then this D right here is a little approach note, a half step below the E flat or the 3rd. And you can think of that as an approach, a chromatic neighbor. You can think of it as the 9 if you want, or the 2, whatever makes the most sense to you. But essentially, we're going to think of these 4 notes as one word. And then this part right here is actually one long approach that's targeting our E flat right there. We can actually loop in all of this stuff, all of this right here, can be thought of as one long approach landing on the E flat. So if we work backwards, we have F, D, E flat. F is a whole step above, D is a half step below, and then E flat is our target note. And you can just continue to work backwards from there. So we have the D, just like we have it here. Half step below, whole step above, half step below, landing on the target. And then you can think of the C sharp here as an approach to the D, a half step below the D. Now, if that's getting too complicated, you can also just bracket this off and think of this as one word in the context of C minor. So we have C sharp as like the flat 2 or the sharp 1. You know, we can think of it as flat 2. And then D is the 2, and then F is the 4. This is a good example of how you can analyze a chunk of notes in multiple different ways. And really it just comes down to which way resonates best with you. And also there are going to be some groups of notes that just don't make a whole lot of sense at first until you memorize them and then maybe see them again in a different part of a solo. So in this case, let's just think of it as the flat 2 and then resolving up to the 2, up to the 4. And from there we can go on to this lick right here, which we've already covered. And then we have this part. This is one long approach targeting the E flat, which is the flat 7 of F7. So we're targeting E flat, and we're starting a whole step below, then we go a half step below, then we jump up a whole step above, and then we go chromatically down from there until we land on our target, E flat. So I would practice that individual word on its own and transpose it into other keys. Remember, we're targeting the flat 7 of the 5 chord. Pick a dominant 7 chord. Let's do D7. What's the flat 7 of D7? It's C. Whole step below, B flat, up a half step, whole step above, chromatic down. Let's pick another dominant 7th chord, A7. What's the 7? A G. Whole step below, chromatic up, jump over it, whole step above, chromatic down. Let's do C7. B flat is the 7. What's a whole step below? All right, let's put parts 2 and 3 together. This is a long lick, so we're going to start assembling as we go here. So back to the original key, and then we're going to go. Let's do it in the key of C major. So the 2 chord is D minor 7, the 5 chord is G7, and then we have C major 7 as the 1 chord. We're only focusing on the 2 and the 5 chord here. So the 2 chord is D minor 7. We're going to arpeggiate up from the 2 or the 9. That's the first part. And then remember, we're targeting the 7 of the 5 chord. What's the 5 chord? It's G7. What's the 7 of that chord? F. So we start a whole step below. Let's put that together. One more time. Arpeggiate up the 2 chord. And then our enclosure landing on the 7 of G7. All right, let's finish out this lick. Here's the end of it. We have the F7 chord going to the B flat major 7, which is the 5 going to the 1. What's happening here? I'm going to break down the beginning part of this as just 3 notes. So we have the 7 of the 5 chord. F7 is the 5 chord. E flat is the 7. And we're going to go down just the chromatic scale until we land on D flat, which is the flat 13 of F7. But you can also just think of this as the flat 7 going down chromatically. A couple notes. And then from there, I'm going to group all of this into one chunk. And that's because it's just one long approach landing on F, which is the 5 of the B flat major chord. So we start on the A, which is the 3rd of F7, and then we're going to go chromatically down from there. And then we're going to do that enclosure, that basic half step above, half step below, and then landing on our target. So we're starting on the 3rd, going down chromatically, and then we have our enclosure, half step above, half step below, target. Put it together. It's mostly just the chromatic scale with that enclosure at the end. Okay, let's put the whole F7 measure together. Remember, we're starting on the 7 of the 5 chord, going down a couple of notes chromatically, then jumping to the 3rd, all together in parts, together. And now let's work back in some of the other parts. So we have part 1, part 2, part 3, part 4, part 5, and then that's kind of it. So here's parts 2 and 3. Here's parts 3 and 4. Here's part 1 going into part 2. Here's 1, 2, 3. Here's 4 and 5. And here's the whole thing together. It's not just about the whole, you have to learn the parts and get to know them well. And if you do, then when it comes to learning new licks, you'll have a much easier time remembering them, internalizing them, and whipping them out in your improvised solos. Earlier in the video, I mentioned my 10 licks every jazz musician should know video that I made a while back. I'm going to link that up on the screen. I highly recommend you check that one out next. It's going to line up very well with what we just discussed. So thanks again for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye-bye.